The house is sold. You're homeless now. My mother-in-law, Diane, said it before I had even climbed the porch steps. I stopped beside my car, still holding the folder from my grandmother Evelyn's will reading. 30 minutes earlier, I had learned she'd left me $8.5 million and the remainder of her estate in Aspen. I'd driven home rehearsing how I would tell my husband, Ethan. Instead, my suitcases were lined up beside the porch. 3 cardboard boxes sat in the snow. And Ethan was standing beside his mother with an envelope in his hand. "Mildred," he said, stepping forward, "this marriage is over." He held out the papers. Divorce. For 8 years, I'd swallowed arguments, ignored Diane's interference, and convinced myself that keeping the peace was worth it. Apparently, Ethan had used that peace to plan my removal. I looked past him toward the house. "What did your mother mean when she said it's sold?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "She meant exactly that. The paperwork is done. You need to find somewhere else to stay." I stared at him. "You sold the house." Diane folded her arms. "Maybe if you'd paid more attention to what your husband handled, you wouldn't look so surprised." That sentence landed harder than the divorce papers. Ethan had always handled bills, insurance, mail, contractor invoices, anything he called household paperwork. I trusted him because he was my husband. But I had never signed a sale agreement. "When did this happen?" I asked. "While you were busy with your grandmother," Ethan said. Busy? As if burying the woman who raised me had been an inconvenience he'd wisely used. My fingers tightened around the folder in my hand, but I didn't mention the inheritance. "Not yet." Instead, I asked, "Show me what I signed." "You don't need to see anything tonight," Ethan said. "My attorney has everything." That was the first moment something felt wrong in a different way. Not cruel. Legally wrong. I looked at the house again. Grandma Evelyn had owned several properties around Aspen. She had let Ethan and me live here after our wedding. Over the years, Ethan started calling it our house, and Diane eventually began calling it Ethan's house. I had never thought much of it. Until now. "Whose name?" I asked slowly. "Did the title company say was on the deed?" Ethan gave a short laugh. "The sale is finished, Mildred. Stop trying to complicate it." And suddenly, I heard my grandmother's voice from years earlier. Never confuse living in a house with owning its title. I looked from Ethan to Diane. Then I smiled. Diane's expression hardened. "What's so funny?" I glanced at the divorce papers in Ethan's hand. Because one question had just become more important than the $8.5 million sitting quietly inside my folder. What exactly had Ethan sold? "I want copies of every document connected to the sale." Ethan's face changed the moment I said it. "Not much, just enough." "You can get whatever you need through my attorney," he said. "No, you told me the house was sold. I want to see what was signed, what was filed, and whose name was used." Diane stepped between us like I had challenged her instead of my husband. "You're being difficult now because you're embarrassed." I ignored her. "Ethan." He shoved the divorce envelope closer to my chest. "Read those first." That refusal told me more than any explanation could. For years, Ethan had slowly started treating Grandma Evelyn's Aspen house like it belonged to him. At first, it was harmless. I paid the electric bill. I covered the roof repair. I handled the contractor. Then it became, "My house needs work." Diane made it worse. She'd walk through the kitchen and say things like, "When Ethan finally renovates this place," or, "This property will be worth a fortune one day." I usually let it go. Grandma handled the legal side of everything herself, and I hated unnecessary conflict. But now I remembered questions Diane had started asking months before Grandma died. Did Evelyn ever transfer the deed? Where does she keep the property records? If you and Ethan ever divorced, would the house be split? At the time, I thought she was just being intrusive. Standing there with my belongings boxed up, those questions no longer sounded casual. I bent down to pick up one of my boxes. A stack of papers slid sideways inside. One photocopy had the Aspen address printed near the top. I pulled it out. There was language about a transfer, an ownership interest, a transaction. But my name wasn't anywhere on it. What is this? Ethan moved fast. He snatched the page from my hand. You don't own anything here anymore. For a second, neither of us moved. Then I straightened. Fine. Deanne looked almost disappointed that I wasn't arguing. I carried one box to my car, got inside, and drove away. 2 blocks later, I pulled over and called Rachel Monroe, Grandma's estate attorney. Mildred, I need you to check something before we talk about the inheritance. Rachel's tone sharpened. What? I gave her the Aspen property address. Pull the county recorder's history. I need to know exactly who owns that house. I heard keys clicking. Then silence. Rachel. More silence. Rachel, what are you looking at? She didn't answer. The next morning, I returned to the house with Rachel beside me. I expected Ethan and Diane. I didn't expect an audience. 2 of Ethan's relatives were standing in the living room, another near the kitchen, while Diane directed people around my boxes like she was supervising an eviction. When she saw me, she raised her voice. Mildred is taking what she came into the marriage with, nothing more. Everyone heard her. That was the point. I felt Rachel glance at me, but I shook my head. I wasn't going to argue about money in front of them. Rachel stepped forward instead. Ethan, I need the recording information associated with the property transaction. Ethan gave a confident little shrug. Gladly. He disappeared into the house and returned with a folder. Diane smiled at the relatives. This has already closed. Mildred just doesn't want to accept reality. Rachel opened the folder. She read the first page, then the second. Her expression remained completely still. Ethan, what ownership interest did you represent as yours? His confidence flickered. It's all there. Rachel placed one document beside the certified county information she had brought. No, that's the problem. The room quieted. The recorded chain of title identifies Evelyn's ownership structure as the legitimate recorded interest before her death. What you're claiming here doesn't match that record. Ethan frowned. Then the county database hasn't been updated. That isn't how ownership works, Rachel said. Signing a private document claiming an interest doesn't magically create title. Diane stepped closer. He lived here for years. He paid for things. He's Mildred's husband. Rachel looked at her. None of those facts automatically put Ethan on a deed. One of Ethan's relatives turned toward him. Wait. Ethan looked away. The relative's voice dropped. Ethan, did you actually own this house? Enough, Ethan snapped. Mildred, get your things and leave. His phone rang before I could answer. He looked at the screen and hesitated. Then he picked up. Yes. We couldn't hear the person on the other end, but we watched Ethan's face. His shoulders stiffened. What title issue? A pause. No, we already handled that. Another pause. His voice rose. What do you mean you can't proceed? Diane stopped smiling. Rachel calmly closed Ethan's folder. When he lowered the phone, she looked directly at him. The county isn't questioning Mildred's ownership. She tapped the recorded property history. It's questioning yours. You knew about this. Ethan pointed at me, as though accusation could repair the paperwork. You knew exactly what I was doing, Mildred. I asked you last night to show me the documents, I said. You refused. Diane immediately stepped in. My son lived in this house for years. He paid utilities. He paid for repairs. He was her husband. Don't stand there pretending he had no claim. Rachel didn't argue. She opened the certified county records we had obtained that morning and placed them on the table. Then show me where his ownership was recorded. Diane went quiet. Rachel turned the pages toward Ethan. The chain of title was painfully simple. Grandma Evelyn had retained the controlling ownership interest. No recorded deed had ever transferred the property to Ethan. And there was no recorded ownership interest supporting the sale Ethan claimed he had completed. Suddenly, every strange conversation from the previous months made sense. Diane asking where Grandma kept the property records. Her questions about whether Evelyn had ever transferred the deed. Ethan insisting on controlling the household paperwork. And then the timing. They had waited until Grandma died. They had waited until I was occupied with her estate. Then they put my belongings outside and acted as if physically removing me could settle the question of legal ownership. Ethan's phone rang again. He stared at it but didn't answer. The transaction is being held while the ownership discrepancy is reviewed, Rachel said. Whatever money you received or expected to receive is now part of a much larger problem. For the first time, the divorce papers in my hand didn't scare me. I gave them to Rachel. Can you refer me to a divorce attorney? Ethan looked at me sharply. Mildred, wait. No. Can we talk privately? No. His voice dropped. You're really going to destroy 8 years over paperwork. I looked at the boxes he had packed for me. You made that decision before I got home. Diane shook her head. Evelyn dying doesn't suddenly make you untouchable. Before Rachel could respond, her phone rang. She glanced at the screen. My assistant. She answered. Yes. Rachel listened without speaking. Then her eyes moved toward me. You matched the estate documents against the county records. A pause. Everything. She ended the call. Ethan stared at her. Diane folded her arms, but her fingers were trembling against her sleeves. Rachel slowly placed her phone on the table and turned to me. Now you can tell them what your grandmother actually left you. I looked at Ethan first, then at Diane. The same two people who had stood on the porch less than 24 hours earlier telling me I was homeless were now waiting for me to explain why my grandmother's attorney was holding county records that contradicted everything they had tried to do. I opened the folder I had carried home from the will reading. Yesterday, I went to Grandma Evelyn's estate attorney because her will was being read. Diane's eyes dropped to the folder. Ethan said nothing. Grandma left me $8.5 million. His face went blank. I continued before he could interrupt. She also left me the remainder of her estate under her estate plan. That includes this Aspen property. Diane stared at me. No. Rachel answered calmly. Yes. Ethan looked from Rachel to me. But this was our house. It was our home, I said. Those aren't the same thing. Rachel placed the county documents on the table. Evelyn had allowed Ethan and me to live in the property after our marriage. Ethan paid utilities and contributed to maintenance, but none of that transferred ownership to him. Grandma had retained the controlling legal interest. The county's recorded chain of title showed it. No recorded deed had ever transferred ownership to Ethan. No amount of calling it his house changed that. And now Grandma's estate documents determined who succeeded to the property. Me. Ethan sank into a chair. So you knew yesterday. I learned about the inheritance yesterday. And you didn't tell me. I almost laughed at the question. I came home planning to. His eyes lifted. I pointed toward the porch, where some of my boxes were still sitting exactly where he and Diane had left them. But you handed me divorce papers before I reached the front door. Diane finally found her voice. This doesn't erase Ethan's investment in this marriage. I didn't say it did. He paid toward this property. Rachel cut in. Those issues can be addressed appropriately in the divorce. They do not manufacture a deed that doesn't exist. Diane's mouth closed. Ethan stood again. Mildred, things haven't been good between us. Mom thought we needed to protect ourselves. There it was. Not an apology. An explanation that somehow made Diane responsible for decisions Ethan had willingly made. You could have asked for a divorce, I said. I did. No, you could have asked for a divorce without putting my belongings outside while I was grieving my grandmother. You could have ended the marriage without claiming you sold property you didn't own. His eyes moved toward the boxes. I was angry. Those boxes answered every question I had about whether this marriage was worth saving. I picked up the divorce papers and placed them back on the table. I'll sign what my attorney advises me to sign. From now on, everything goes through counsel. That was when Diane seemed to understand what had actually changed. She couldn't intimidate a county record. She couldn't talk over a chain of title. And she couldn't turn her son into an owner simply by repeatedly calling the property his. The attempted transaction did not survive the title examination. Once the ownership discrepancy was formally addressed, the supposed sale failed. Any funds advanced in connection with it became subject to recovery. And the purchaser pursued repayment rather than pretending Ethan could deliver ownership he never possessed.